Om. 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 Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. You know, that word strength in that opening prayer certainly does apply to our study of Swami Vivekananda, because he tests us. He tests us by pushing the boundaries of our credulity, our ability to grasp what he's saying. So we're starting a new chapter, the Atman, its bondage and freedom, which is in many ways a recapitulation of the last talk that we studied, which was simply titled The Atman. But let us plunge ahead. We can do with the repetition. I tried to find out where this was delivered and couldn't discover it. It just simply says delivered in America. Completely by accident, I discovered that talk, the Atman, was given to the Brooklyn Ethical Association on February 2nd, 1896. Where this one was delivered, I don't know. Not that it makes a whole lot of difference. But before we begin, is there anything that anyone would like to offer from their own wisdom or experience, or any concern or question that anyone would like to raise about what we've studied so far of Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga? All right. According to the Advaita philosophy, there is only one thing real in the universe, which it calls Brahman. Everything else is unreal, manifested and manufactured out of Brahman by the power of Maya. I'm going to read that again. He's starting with the absolute key idea. According to the Advaita philosophy, the non-dual philosophy, according to the non-dual philosophy, there is only one thing real in the universe, which it calls Brahman. Everything else is unreal, by which he means manifested and manufactured out of Brahman by the power of Maya. We might interpolate by its power. of Maya, by Brahman's power of Maya. To reach back to that Brahman is our goal. We are, each one of us, that Brahman, that reality, plus this Maya. We are, each one of us, that Brahman, that reality, plus this Maya. So each one of us, sitting here this evening, is that Brahman. And the reason we appear to be sitting here together, certainly this is what seems to be the case. We are sitting here together studying this talk by Swami Vivekananda, delivered sometime in the late 1890s. All of this is by the power of Maya. We are, each one of us, that Brahman, that reality, plus this Maya. If we can get rid of this Maya, or ignorance, then we become what we really are. According to this philosophy, each man consists of three parts: the body, the internal organ, or the mind, and behind that, what is called the Atman, the self. According to Advaita philosophy, each man consists of three parts: the body, the internal organ, or the mind, and behind that, what is called the Atman, the self. The body is the external coating, and the mind is the internal coating of the Atman, who is the real perceiver, the real enjoyer, the being in the body who is working the body by means of the internal organ or the mind. Now, we need to fully grasp this and be at least tentatively in a kind of agreement with it. We can't be arguing with it, in other words, if we're going to have our minds calm enough to receive what the Swami is about to say. So if you're still in any concern or doubt about this, or you have something to contribute from your own experience that validates this, then please, now is the time to say it. Any concern or question is very appropriate right here. If there are doubts or questions, let's air them.
Brother Shankara, Sumesh here. Hi.
Yes, Sumesh.
Not a doubt, but just to clarify my understanding, it says, if we can get rid of this Maya or ignorance, then we become what we really are. And when we're talking about getting rid of this Maya, it means knowing what is Maya and what is not Maya, right? It's not like we get rid of our body and our mind. It is just having the knowledge of it.
Precisely.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
So it isn't that we get rid of our minds or our bodies. I mean, we may, if we reach that state of nirvikalpa samadhi, we may simply not return to the body. The two coatings, we may not. We may come back and persist for as long as 21 days. Or if we're one of those very unusual beings, like Swami Vivekananda, we have the ability to retain the body after the state of nirvikalpa samadhi. But within recorded history, we may number less than 100 of such beings. So we may leave the body behind, or we may, as Adi Shankaracharya says in the Vivekachudamani, which is his workbook on Advaita, he says we may get intimations of this. We may have a brief experience of this, a brief state, and then return to our embodied state. And this may happen a number of times before we actually are immersed in that nirvikalpa state. So that's the best answer that can be given from here, Somesh.
That helps. Thank you.
Okay, anything else from anyone? And that was a very good question to ask. We don't leave the body and mind as we rid ourselves of the ignorance, which is a process. Patanjali describes it very, very well in the Yoga Sutras. The process of losing our ignorance. Anything else from anyone? All right. So I'm going to read this again. Who is who? According to Advaita philosophy, each human being consists of three parts: the body, the internal organ or the mind, and behind that, what is called the Atman, the self. The body is the external coating, and the mind the internal coating of the Atman, who is the real perceiver, the real enjoyer, the being in the body who is working the body by means of the internal organ or the mind. So it is the Atman that is giving us the sense of participation in all of this, that we are perceiving, that we are enjoying, that we are working the body. So the Atman is doing this. Swami Prabhavananda called this being the magician. And what he said is, everyone loves the magic, but no one wants to know the magician. So this Atman is the magician working the body by means of the internal organ or the mind, working the body, the external coating, 5 organs of action, 5 organs of perception. The mind, as we know, according to Sankhya philosophy, is separate from the 5 organs of action and the 5 organs of perception. Those are part of the body. So by means of the mind, the Atman, which is the buddhi and the ahamkara, and the mahat or great cause, is working these things through the mind. The Atman is the one existence in the human body which is immaterial, not material, not a compound, he means. The Atman is the only existence in the human body which is immaterial. Because it is immaterial, it cannot be a compound. And because it is not a compound, it does not obey the law of cause and effect. And so it is immortal. That which is compounded, that which is made of more than one element, will ultimately dissolve according to his formulation here. The Atman, which is not material, it's beyond the subtle even, it's immaterial. So it is immortal. That which is immortal can have no beginning, because everything with a beginning must have an end. It also follows that it must be formless. There cannot be any form without matter. I'm going to repeat those 2 points. That which is immortal can have no beginning, because everything with a beginning must have an end. It also follows that it must be formless. There cannot be any form without matter. Everything that has form must have a beginning and an end. We have none of us seen a form which had not a beginning and which will not have an end. A form comes out of a combination of force and matter. This chair has a peculiar form, that is to say, a certain quantity of matter is acted upon by a certain amount of force and made to assume a particular shape. The shape is the result of a combination of matter and force. The combination cannot be eternal. There must come to every combination a time when it will dissolve. So all forms have a beginning and an end. The Swami is defining the contents of our ignorance. That's what he's doing for us here. We know name and form. They are the manufacture of Maya out of matter and force. This is what we are to see as what is not ultimately real. That's what the Swami is doing here. A combination cannot be eternal. There must come to every combination a time when it will dissolve. So all forms have a beginning and an end. We know our body will perish. It had a beginning and it will have an end. But the self, having no form, cannot be bound by the law of beginning and end. It is existing from infinite time, just as time is eternal. So the self of man is eternal, immortal, eternal. So any comment or question about those ideas, that definition of our ignorance,
Yes.
as belief in name and form.
Yes. Is the Atman similar to either or the soul or the ego?
The ego, as it exists within our minds, is a reflection of the one ego called the ahamkara. So we can say that that is, just for the sake of talking about it, an aspect of the Atman, yes. The Atman has no form really, has no name really, but for the sake of talking about it, we have this name, Atman, which is compounded, if you will, for the sake of talking about it, of the great cause, that which manifested all of this, the power of Brahman, which is Maya, and the first two aspects of it that manifest everything else are the buddhi, that which can tell one thing from another, the discriminative function, and the ahamkara, the sense of ego, which says, I am the one discerning this from that. And then going on to manipulate it into manifest reality as the gunas and their products. Now, the soul, the Judeo-Christian idea of the soul is not precisely equivalent to Atman. Actually, Jesus, when he says, I am the vine, is more precisely equivalent to the Atman. And he says, ye are the branches. The Judeo-Christian idea of the soul exists within that idea of the branches. They are not separate any more than the vine is separate from its roots within the Judeo-Christian idea of Brahman, which is that aspect of God which cannot be said. It has no name, cannot be said aloud. So you can see there's a yes and no when it comes to souledness. But if you look in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus said, I am everything and I am doing everything. Split a piece of wood, I am there. Turn over a rock, I am there. So, as far as equivalence goes, Jesus would appear to be the Atman. And that's why it's said by the Christians that Jesus lives in the heart of every human being. They just don't know it. Just as Advaita says, the Atman dwells within every human being. We just don't know it. Is that an adequate answer?
I think that helps a lot.
Okay.
Because I always get the Atman, I kind of always try to find a place for it to kind of,
Well, yes.
the definition kind of eludes me. So that
Well,
helps me kind of, that
that's
helps a
why the
lot. Thank
Swami is giving these talks, to give us the best indication he can. But how can something that is formless, truly nameless, eternal, infinite, how can the mind contain it, Dennis? How can we really grasp it? As Swami Prabhavananda wisecracked one time, he said, grasping reality with the mind is like trying to empty the ocean of consciousness with a teaspoon. So I share your lack of ability to fully grasp and have a place of full understanding for Atman. Because Atman and Brahman are equivalent terms. We say Atman for the sake of convenience. So thanks for bringing that up. That is exactly on point. Anyone
Thank you.
else? Okay. Secondly, it, that is the Atman, secondly, it must be all-pervading. It is only form that is conditioned and limited by space. That which is formless cannot be confined in space. So according to Advaita Vedanta, the self, the Atman, in you, in me, in everyone, is omnipresent. You are as much in the sun now as in this earth, as much in England as in America. But the self acts through the mind and the body, and where they are, its action is visible. Let's go through that again. According to Advaita Vedanta, the self, the Atman, in you, in me, in everyone, is omnipresent. You are as much in the sun now as in this earth, as much in England as in America. But the self acts through the mind and the body, and where they are, its, that is, the Atman's, action is visible. Each work we do, each thought we think, produces an impression, called in Sanskrit samskara, upon the mind. And the sum total of these impressions becomes the tremendous force which is called character. The character of a man is what has created, the character of a man is what he has created for himself. It is the result of the mental and physical actions that he has done in his life. The sum total of the samskaras is the force which gives a man the next direction after death. So once again, we've had a a definition of an aspect of our ignorance. Any comment from anyone, from your own wisdom or experience, or any concern or question about what has been said about the nature of our current condition, which the Swami, each one of us, says each one of us has a character. It's our character that is a composite of all of the samskaras. He says in this life, Advaita philosophy admits of reincarnation. And if you remember the earlier talks in this series, the Swami talked about the fact that we are as old as creation itself, and we are still evolving what was involved at the moment of that manifestation occurred. So any comments or questions?
Brother Shankara,
Yes.
I suppose I see a little bit of a conflict in what you're saying, because he says it's existing from infinite time. But if we're saying that creation happened, that means that time has a beginning. So what does he mean by infinite time and that time is eternal?
Maya, which is manifestation, the creation, has a beginning and it will end. But that which created it, it only seems to be many. It is actually only one. It is that which manifested all of this. So the Atman or Brahman, the force of which manifested all this, is formless, eternal, omnipresent, infinite. Its manifestation is not. So does that get it, Roberto? If there's more to ask, please do ask it. I'm sure that the same question exists in other people's minds.
I'm just thinking that, from my understanding, that time is also a manifestation of the mind.
Yes.
It is also subject to beginning and an end.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm a little confused when he talks about infinite time.
Well, it's just a way of talking about it, Roberto. The infinite is not really. Infinity is not a long time. The eternal is not a long time. Manifestation takes place. I mean, if we're to believe the astrophysicists, we are something less than 14% into this universe's life, the universe in which we live. We're about to find out more about that because the James Webb telescope is just deploying so far very successfully. And it will learn a great deal more. But according to what has been discovered so far, the universe is approximately 13.7 billion years old. That's when the singularity manifested, which is this clumsy term Big Bang. That happened 13.7 billion years ago. According to the findings about the Higgs boson, there is a time of anti-entropy. We're 13.7 billion years into what will be approximately 50 billion years of anti-entropy, and then another approximately 50 billion years of entropy. I mean, entropy is going on all the time, but it isn't right now predominant according to the astrophysicists. What is predominant now is anti-entropy. So ultimately, one idea, the predominant idea in astrophysics, is that the universe will expand so much that nothing will have any relationship to anything else. It will be so far apart. Relationship equals vibration. Vibration equals heat. The condition of the universe will be absolute zero, no vibration. Now, this is very much equivalent to the conditions described by the Vedas as the night of Brahman, when there is no vibration, that is to say, the gunas, the three gunas, are in perfect equilibrium. Therefore, no vibration. The gunas vibrating, the gunas interacting with one another, which creates vibration, produces manifestation. During the period of non-manifestation, called the night of Brahma, there is no vibration, no manifestation. This looks very much like, the parallels are not exact, but it looks very much like the condition of absolute zero, which is the predominant opinion among astrophysicists as to the fate of our universe. We know it's expanding, and things are getting further and further apart from one another. In another 87 billion years, they'll be so far apart that nothing can interact with each other. So there will be no form, no vibration. That represents the best understanding from here of things that happen in time. And this timelessness or infinitude or eternity in which Brahman exists or Atman exists. Anything else from anyone?
So, Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
so are we to understand or assume that the samskaras which go with the subtle body also exists in the form of vibrations?
Yes. Everything exists in the form of vibration. Subtle vibration, gross vibration. This is the interaction of the gunas according to the pretty much universally accepted within the systems of philosophy known as Sanatana Dharma. This aspect of Sanatana Dharma, this aspect of Sankhya philosophy is accepted, that the three gunas are responsible by their vibration, by their interaction, for the manifestation that we see. Sankhya means counting or enumeration, and it means counting the ways in which the gunas interact with one another that produce what we see. Anyone who's studied chemistry and looks at the enumeration within Sankhya will be reminded of the periodic table. It's a left-minded way of trying to get a handle on what it is that we're actually seeing, experiencing. So our samskaras are indeed a form of vibration, one that persists and is acted on by the gunas and energized by them. Each samskara is. This is why when we're trying to practice contemplation, concentration, and meditation, things will just suddenly pop up seemingly out of nowhere, because the energy of a guna or gunas has touched on a samskara and energized it. Does that get it for you?
Yes, Brother Shankara, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? Okay. The sum total of the samskaras is the force which gives a man the next direction after death. A man dies, the body falls away and goes back to the elements, but the samskaras remain, adhering to the mind, which, being made of fine material, does not dissolve, because the finer the material, the more persistent it is. And again, this will remind you of chemistry and physics if the combination made of the various atomic elements has a defined lifetime that is, in cosmic time, relatively short. The elements themselves, being finer, persist longer. The mind, being made of fine material, does not dissolve at death, because the finer the material, the more persistent it is. But the mind also dissolves in the long run, and that is what we are struggling for. The mind also dissolves in the long run. This goes directly to the question that Somesh asked earlier, or what he raised. I don't know that he raised it as a question exactly. But the mind also dissolves in the long run, and that is what we are struggling for. In this connection, the best illustration that comes to my mind is that of the whirlwind. Different currents of air coming from different directions meet, and at the meeting point become united and begin rotating. different currents of air coming from different directions meet, and at that meeting point become united and begin rotating. As they rotate, they form a body of dust, drawing in bits, drawing in bits of paper, straw, etc., at one place only to drop them and go on to another, and so on, and so go on rotating, raising and forming bodies out of the materials which are before them. Even so, the forces called prana in Sanskrit come together and form the body and the mind out of matter and move on until the body falls down, when they raise other materials to make another body, and when that falls, another rises. And thus the process goes on. This is the Swami's description of reincarnation. Now, these forces that he's talking about, he says air currents, these are the gunas. He's talking about the gunas. And they do rotate, according to Sankhya philosophy. The term is vritti, or whirlpool. So this is the Swami's metaphor, this whirlwind, made of air currents meeting. The three pranas meet, they whirl, they gather together material and form a body out of it. After a while, that body falls, another is formed, and so on. So any comments or questions about that? Okay, this is, so he says, they raise other materials and make another body, and when that falls, another rises, and thus the process goes on. Force cannot travel without matter. So when the body falls down, the mind stuff remains, prana, in the form of samskaras, acting on it, and then it goes on to another point, raises up another whirl from fresh materials, and begins another motion. And so it travels from place to place until the force is all spent, and then it falls down, ended. So when the mind will end, be broken to pieces entirely, without leaving any samskara, we shall be entirely free. And until that time, we are in bondage. Until then, the Atman is covered by the whirl of the mind and imagines it is being taken from place to place. When the whirl falls down, the Atman finds it is all-pervading. It can go where it likes, is entirely free, and is able to manufacture any number of minds or bodies it likes. But until then, it can go only with the whirl. This freedom is the goal towards which we are all moving. This is why the extreme Advaitists talk about annihilating the mind. This is their word, annihilating the mind, breaking it into pieces, making it unable to function with one another, with itself. It is the purpose of the koan in Zen Buddhism. What is the sound of one hand clapping? There is no answer to that question. But the master insists that the student return with an answer to that question. If the student is sincere and stays with the master, ultimately the mind is shattered on that unanswerable question. And what is revealed cannot be said in words. But the master knows when the student's mind has been shattered and they have seen beyond what the mind can do or contain. What Vivekananda says in his introduction to Raja Yoga is that what creates our universe are these whirlpools, vrittis, in our mind stuff, chitta. He said, when your chitta is free of all whirlpools, all vibration, then your universe, not the universe of Maya, but your universe of Maya will cease to exist. And what is behind it will be revealed. So there must be some comment or concern or questions about these very provocative thoughts. Certainly they raise all kinds of thoughts and concerns and issues with me. So what are yours?
Well, I have one.
Yes.
These whirlpools that are many, and then we go back to the very beginning of everything is Brahman. And it makes me think that these many whirlpools are just kind of like the many of us kind of trying to return back to the one of Brahman.
Exactly.
It's hard to explain, but
but you've grasped it, Dennis. That's exactly it. The gunas are trying to return to equilibrium. Whether the Swami says that in one of the talks here in Jnana Yoga, that's what he says in some place. That the gunas are trying to return to equilibrium. But they're driven on by the force of Maya, by the great cause, by the cosmic minds having said in the words of the Chandogya Upanishad, I am one, I shall body myself forth as many. Now, according to the Advaitists, nothing happens. Nothing happens. A dream begins, a dream of manyness. And everything that we are, see, do, perceive in any way is part of that dream of manyness. So you grasped it very well. That was nicely said.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Namaste, Brother Shankara. Namaste, everybody.
Namaste.
You know, I was listening to what you said when you were reading, and when Swamiji mentions that annihilation of the mind. That's something, and then once the mind disappears, that's when the Atman is revealed. And what I see is that instead of, this is my own understanding, is that instead of spinning more ideas and thoughts, my attention comes down to being aware, practice of being aware, and just shutting down the mind, or being getting established into a practice, which I would say mindfulness, which is something very simple but very practical. And that, you know, I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle, the author of Power of Now, and he talks about being in the present moment. And he has a wonderful statement. He said, your mind will drive you crazy. And the more we have all these ideas and theories, we go on, we are not going to experience it. Sri Ramakrishna said, there are so many Pandits who are born and have died, but the only ones who have realized are the ones who are recognized, or something have achieved their goal. And what I see is that I come from a path of devotion, like you know, Brother Shankara, but this particular aspect of Swamiji, what he said, it is so well said. And I think it brings attention to practice of mindfulness. That's how I see it than anything else.
Well,
I mean, I do not disagree with anything else, but yeah.
Shailesh, who can possibly take issue with what you said? To be aware of what the mind is doing is to become the witness. The witness is the face in our awareness of the Atman. That witness self is our first experience of the Atman. That which is watching and experiencing, as the Swami said early in this talk, it is the only enjoyer. It is the only experiencer. It is the only doer. And when we, as you say, are mindful, that is to say, when we watch the mind, then we become subtly but automatically, more and more powerfully, we become that witness self. And as we become that witness self, we begin to be more and more free, more and more joyous, more and more manifesting of the aspects of the divine that can be identified as Satchidananda.
Correct.
Existence
Very well.
itself, knowledge itself, joy itself, bliss itself.
And a lot of what I've seen is that, for example, compassion or love, we talk about, we read so much about it, but unless that compassion it ignites in your mind about something or someone. It's only theory. And with this, what I've seen is that with this mindfulness, that has helped me to become more compassionate. Or that's just one property which has come out, and it just makes you a better person. I mean, it's a long run to realize the Atman or anything, but just to become a better person, contributing in a better way. The mindfulness is one of the best things, I would say.
Yes.
I mean, that's one of the ways. I'm sure there are.
Oh, the practicality of these things is undeniable, and it's something that Krishna discusses very much in the Gita. You become more practical, more efficient, more everything happens, when you are habitually generous, generosity pursues you. When you are habitually compassionate, compassion pursues you. Believe it. I'm asking you to at least tentatively hold that idea. This is the transformation of character.
Hmm.
So we'll leave it at that for this week.
Brother Shankara,
Yes, dear.
sometimes I have a hard time defining what is the present moment. By the time you focus on the moment, it's already past.
No,
Or
it hasn't. It's just that moment is it now that moment now has the contents that you are experiencing within that moment then.
Shankara, if I can add, I once heard something that I thought was very wise, that you can always focus on the present moment by focusing on your breath. Your breath never exists in the future or the past. It always exists in the present.
Yes. Very, very good, Roberto. And that is good. And your breath says, I am, aham. So I was being playful. Of course, it's hard to grasp the moment. But if we stop thinking about the moment and stop thinking and start thinking, what is within my awareness? Then we are experiencing the moment. It is a whirlwind, as the Swami says. And it seems to move from place to place and thing to thing and thought to thought. And here we are on a Wednesday evening at slightly after 9 o'clock. All of these definitions of name and form that we have, all of which are a form of Maya, and therefore by definition, not the reality. But they are the reality that we know. So we lovingly with one another make the best of it. Yes, we struggle.
I'm
So-
sitting here on the deck and just lit a fire, and
I
just feels so good.
I see that, dear.
And it's so when you were talking about all this universe and stars and the expansion, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful night tonight, if you can
Yes.
see up and just feels so good.
Well, that's very sweet indeed. So anything else, any final thought from anyone before we close? All right. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Abir Moiti. O dearly beloved, lead us from thy lesser truth to thy highest truth. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through. Light us through and through with thy everlasting, shining presence. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga Durga Durga. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. May we go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. So the next opportunity for us to get together will be on Saturday at noon, when we will talk about Swami Prabhavananda's amazing book, his translation and commentary of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, called How to Know God. And then on Sunday, the talk will be on modern masters of Advaita. Swami Vivekananda, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, and a visitor from the world of quantum physics. Not a physical visitor, but someone who became a modern master of Advaita, coming at it from the discoveries of quantum physics. So until next time, may you be safe, may you be healthy. Any final thought from anyone? All right. Good night, dears. That's a lovely fire, Shailesh. It makes me envious. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
This is Dhoni.
Dhuni fire, yeah.